Welcome to Intel on AI, the podcast that connects listeners with leaders. My name is Heather McGuigan, and I am your host. Today's guest is Ted Shelton. Ted is a senior leader at Inflection AI, which is shaping the future of human-computer interaction. Their breakthrough product, Pi, is the first AI designed with emotional intelligence. An empathetic conversational assistant that redefines how people relate to machines. His work empowers organizations to harness AI for scalable, personalized interactions across every customer touchpoint. Ted, welcome to Intel on AI.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
I gotta say, I am really fascinated to hear about this. So I'm going to launch in with our first question. Your team often speaks about emotional intelligence in AI. For a business audience, what does that actually look like in customer interactions?
Well, I think the main question in interacting with AI is whether the system is designed to simply answer your question, or whether, in fact, the system can interact and elicit follow-up information and in more depth, and then also answer in a form where you feel like you're being supported in the answer. So, great example, one of my teammates here put a question in ChatGPT and Pi side by side and said, what should I do if I'm pulled over for a DUI? Hopefully not because she was actually pulled over. But anyway, and it illustrates the point. ChatGPT gives a really good, straightforward answer of factual information. Here are things to do and not do during the traffic stop, during the court hearing, whatever it is, right? Pi says, wait, is this happening right now? Are you okay? Right? Very, very different kind of interaction. Now, in a business context, that can mean all sorts of things, but you want your coworkers to be empathetic and engaged. There's a ton of reports and studies out there that talk about how a more engaged, supportive workforce is a more productive and successful one working together. And you want your AI to be that way too.
Absolutely. And it's also that the answer can be very different if you are looking ahead at something, if you are hindsight asking a question, or whether you're dealing with an issue right in the moment. That can elicit a different kind of response.
Absolutely. And so we actually recruited a panel of 26,000 school teachers and university professors to help us train Pi to have that empathetic, supportive response.
Now, how does Inflection's AI approach differ from traditional enterprise AI platforms, especially in terms of speed to insight and value delivery?
One of the things that we hear over and over again from our customers is that they don't want a multi-month science project to try to figure out what should we do with AI and how is it going to help us as a company. They want to be able to have something that gets installed and turned on, and from day one, it is useful. And so that our goal in delivering the Inflection AI Enterprise Suite is to be able to deliver something to a company where they can say, hey, I understand how my employees day one are actually going to immediately get value. So one of the things that we do, for example, is we connect our AI to structured data. So maybe you have a database full of procurement information, all your vendors, all your suppliers, all the products you buy. Wouldn't it be great to be able to have your employees be able to ask natural language questions like, I don't know, what would be the impact of 134% tariffs on all the products that I source from China? I know, crazy question. No one would ever ask that. But
anyway, possibly ask a question like that. Why would you need to?
Would you need to? But anyway, it is as a for instance, right? And what you want is you want it to be able to then figure out well, what does it mean to ask for a product? What does it mean for it to be sourced in China? What does it mean for it to have an amount associated that you spend? And then how do I apply 134%? So we have a whole agent architecture for interacting with structured data. So day one, we can deploy the system and immediately employees in the business can be like, oh my God, this is an unlock for me. We're getting value.
Amazing. So Pi is described as the first AI designed with emotional intelligence. And again, earlier we used the word empathetic intelligence, which is actually different from emotional intelligence. So can you share a real world example? The DUI was really great. Is there another example of Pi enhancing a customer experience?
Well, so one of the things that I think is really interesting is the way in which Pi is set up to ask questions, not just answer questions. So you think of it as Socratic. And so a customer might say, I'm really unhappy with this product, and I don't know what to do. And Pi then might respond again empathetically, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you're unhappy. Our goal is really to try to make sure you're satisfied. I can do a number of things. I can help you facilitate a return, or maybe there's a way that I can help you solve whatever problem you're having that is making you dissatisfied. How would you like me to help you?" Right? Instead of it just jumping immediately to, "Here is the address for returns." Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because someone might not want to return a product. I want to know how it works, or can you take me through a section of the instructions that I didn't understand, or I'm not using it properly. Can you explain how it is I'm exactly supposed?
Did you plug it in?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So, what kinds of business problems are best solved with emotionally intelligent AI today? And which ones are not ready for that kind of technology yet?
Well, I think the second question is harder
Mm.
because I think almost always an empathetic AI is going to be more valuable than one that is simply factual. I mean, you don't have to immediately go to emotion to be talking about an AI that is simply a better coworker. If I'm doing some work and I am using an AI to do that work, wouldn't it be nice if the AI was also saying, "Hey, that was a great suggestion. Great question," right? I mean, like, how is that bad? Like, it makes us all feel good to be told, "Hey, you asked a great question." And also the ability for it to follow up with questions, right? One of the things in going back to that example of interacting with structured data, so I asked about 134% tariffs. And then maybe the AI comes back and says, "Would you like to understand what some product substitutions might look like so you can source those same products from somewhere other than China?" Right, as a follow-up question, right? And so having the AI be contextually aware, have a memory of the interaction, and be empathetic and sort of imagine it's working to help you get your job done better, as opposed to just being an answerer. So what is it? What is not ready for that? Boy, I mean, I'll have to think about that. I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'd be curious about an answer where I would sort of go, but whose opinion is it? Or do I straight want the data and not necessarily an interpretation of the data? I wonder if there's times where like just the number without any opinion on it, but it's hard to know which industries and exactly which situations that would be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just cued something for me. So we do find sometimes that Pi can be too chatty,
Me too.
right? And sometimes want it to be shorter in answering, right? And so we actually do have a version of Pi which we call productivity, and so we can detect the intent of the user. If the user says something like, "Don't be so chatty," or "Just give me the answer," or whatever. Like it'll pick up on that, just detect that intent, and use the productivity version. It'll be less chatty. Yeah.
I think my husband would like that tool for me. Less chatty.
Yeah. Well, let me know. I'll send him a credit card form to fill out.
Just tell me what I need to know. You've talked a little bit in the past about democratizing decision support beyond the C-suite. What does that actually enable for frontline employees or middle management to do?
Well, imagine, if I just give you that structured data example. Today, what do businesses have? They have a whole group of business analysts who, if I'm a senior executive, I can say, tell me what the impact of 134% tariffs would be. And so some business analyst has to go and figure out which data sets to go and retrieve that information from and how to do the analysis. So it's a bunch of work. And so I can't let anyone in the company ask a question because I don't have an endless number of business analysts. But what if you did? What if you had the AI business analyst? Well, then you could actually let anybody ask questions, right? You could say the warehouse manager is now able to ask questions about, "Hey, how is the volume of products being shipped from China changed from last month to this month? Maybe that's important to the way things are stocked in the storeroom or whatever it is." That warehouse manager now can make better decisions because they have access to tools and data that they don't have access to in a world in which my resource of a business analyst is constrained.
I want to ask a question about legacy data debt. How can AI platforms help organizations sidestep or overcome it?
Well, I think there are a couple of different forms of legacy data. Um, I think one challenge that a lot of companies struggle with is the quality of their data. I was just having a conversation with a customer this morning, in fact, about saying, look, I get spreadsheets that have a list of customers' names. It's the name in the spreadsheet is XYZ. But then if I go to Salesforce, I have 15 different entries for XYZ. I have XYZ Global and XYZ US, and how do I actually match these things up, right? That's an example of a legacy data problem. One of the important things you can do is to take the rest of the context. So that spreadsheet doesn't just say XYZ. It says we ship this product on this date, and this is the contact that we interact with, and there might be a whole set of data. So I can use an LLM to take the entire context of a particular data element to be able to then compare it to the other data source and figure out which of these XYZs is important, right? So there's a step that a human being would otherwise have to do that I can now rely upon machine intelligence to do for me. And by the way, on the tail end of that, I can also clean up the data. I can go back to that spreadsheet and write, oh, this was actually XYZ US, and fix the spreadsheet, right?
And when a company is selling millions of products, there isn't a person to go through that data. There's not enough time to be able to compile and really understand all of that. So having those systems in place that can properly read that data can only be beneficial to a company.
Absolutely. And, use AI, clean up your data. Yes.
Yeah. What organizational assumptions do leaders need to let go of in order to fully harness AI in their workflows?
Well, look, I think there's probably 4 or 5 things that have to change in the way that we think about work today to really embrace the full value of AI. The first one is that we know how the work needs to be done, right? I think one of the things that every organization, you could be 5 years old or 50 years old or 100 years old. You've, over the time of your business operations, developed certain ways of doing work. And the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, I'm going to use technology to do the work that I do today faster, but do it the same way that I've always done it. And instead, we need to be thinking about actually, maybe the work needs to be done differently. And so using AI ends up fundamentally changing the processes and the workflows in organizations if we do it right. Now, the next step, though, what that does is it changes what the role of people is in those interactions. And so I think the second thing that we need to rethink is, what are the things that we want people doing in these workflows? And I would argue that there are really 3 key things that we want humans to do, so that at some future endpoint where we have us all working properly, right? Not Monday, on Monday, 2:47 p.m. Pacific time, suddenly they're going to flip the switch and it's going to work. But where we're headed is that people are going to do 3 things. The first one, and the most important, I think, although the other 2 are super important too. Maybe I shouldn't say anything's most important, but the first is critical thinking. Because what we shouldn't be doing is simply handing over to the machine agency. We need to remain having the super agency to be able to control the future of ourselves, our organizations, and our species. And so if we don't understand how the machine is making decisions, if we don't understand what it's doing, then we've actually lost agency. And so we need to be able to have the critical thinking to oversee the machine so that we are responsible for and accountable for the decisions the machine is making. That doesn't mean intercepting every decision and getting in the way of it. It means when a decision is made, knowing why and how that machine was making the decision and being able to say, yes, I approve of that process. So critical thinking, number 1. Number 2 is creativity. The machines are fantastic at generating things, but they are better and more interesting things that they generate if we give them better and more interesting direction. So I don't know if you've played at all with the latest video generation tools. Google just came out with one. It seems like there's one every day. But how do I make it interesting? Like I can say, show a room full of busy office workers, right? That would be pretty boring. They're like, you get creative and show an octopus dancing in the office. Suddenly it's more interesting. And if I could go further and further and say, show the octopus handing out treats to all the employees as they're working, right? And suddenly the creativity is driving something really exceptional coming out of the machine instead of it being boring. So critical thinking, creativity. And then the third one is about collaboration and connection. Because ultimately, we as human beings should look at our coworkers and our friends and our family and recognize that there is a core value as a species in having a human being to human being relationship. We shouldn't assume these machines are going to be our friends. In fact, it's, I think, dangerous when we...
There's a lot of movies that suggest that.
I'll get down the list. The connection and the collaboration needs to really be human-human. So I think what we want to do is we want to redesign work so that humans are doing those three things: critical thinking, creativity, and then these connections and collaboration. And then that leads, though, to the third thing, which is we have to redesign organizations. So many organizations are, people are valued based upon the number of people they manage, and the hierarchies that are created, right? It's like, it's not about outcomes. It's not about quality. It's not about, morale of employees. It's not about, like, there are all sorts of other things that we should really be organizing and managing organizations around. So that's got to change. And so by the time you've changed those three things, then you're suddenly in the business, you're changing your business model, and you're changing your operating model. And so in my view, I mean, I'm maybe too close to this, but I think we are at the precipice of a major transformation in work. Along the lines, I mean, I think many commentators have talked about the origins of the top-down pyramid-based management structures that were introduced initially with railroads, but then sort of took over all Western business in the early 1900s. And we've lived in that world now for 150 years-ish, and it's coming to an end. And we're going to radically change from those hierarchical organizations, network organizations. And leaders are going to have to let go of more control, have more distributed decision-making, have more communication between all the actors within their organizations. It's going to be really, really big change coming over the next decade.
Do you think that can happen with this current generation of corporation owners, or do you think it's going to happen with a younger generation that's not relearning concepts, but learning them in this new way to begin with?
I'm a grandfather, and that was an ageist question.
A little bit, but it's tough. It's tough to change.
I think it's tough for young people to change too. I don't think it has to do. I think as a society, we do a bad job of teaching people adaptability, and I think that the roots for that go back to as a species, what the strengths and weaknesses were within a tribe. If you were sitting, in the bushes and you hear a sound, you pretty instantaneously need to know, is that a tiger coming to eat me, or is it just my friend coming back from the hunt? And once you've learned the sound, like that is a resilient benefit to you to know the difference between those two sounds. So you leap up and run if it's in fact the tiger, right? So people survive if they, build up a world model, and then those world models remain relatively consistent. And the problem for us today is that our world models cannot be consistent at the pace at which technology is changing. Whether it's, in my youth, the personal computer, and then the local area network, wow, and the floppy disk. And, I remember my computer being upgraded from 32K of memory to 48K of memory. What an amazing day that was. If I was stuck there, right, imagine, like, my watch has more memory than that, right? So I've had as a technologist and a business person to be very adaptable during my lifetime, and I think we're all capable of it. I just don't think we create the right incentive models for it, and we don't teach it, and we need to fix that.
That's an awesome, awesome answer. Thank you so much. As companies shift to AI-powered experiences, how should leaders be thinking about trust and transparency in automated systems?
Well, I think this gets a little bit back to my point about critical thinking. As we use artificial intelligence and automation of all kinds, I think there's an enormous risk that we embed the existing biases that we have in our processes into these new systems. There was a very early experiment done, now we're talking a decade ago, I think, by Amazon in using AI to review resumes. And to train the system, they used resumes that they had humans review in the past. And so they had a scoring system in which they knew that humans had said this was a good resume or not, and this was ultimately someone we hired or not. Well, what they discovered was that when they trained the model, that the model tended to hire white men. Okay, but that wasn't a problem with the model. That was a problem with the data. That was a problem with all of the humans who had hired in the past who were biased toward white men. And so that bias was brought into the automated system. And so I think as companies, we have to be very diligent about understanding garbage in is garbage out. How are we designing these things? How do they actually work? Do we have oversight over how they're working? Do we regularly review and audit how they're working to make sure that they're doing what we want? Like, for God's sake, if you have a company that wants to hire only white men, maybe you go do that. We tend to think here at Inflection that diversity is actually a superpower. And so we wouldn't want that, right? So, but the important part is for a company to say, be explicit about what you want, design the system to achieve your objective, and then also on an ongoing basis, monitoring and audit your system to make sure it is in fact doing what you want.
Cool. What's your perspective on AI at the edge? Do you see a future where emotionally intelligent AI runs outside the cloud, say on devices or embedded systems?
Absolutely. The really interesting thing is actually even beyond that. So yes, I'm going to have AI embedded in all sorts of things in my environment. But the AI embedded in my environment is also going to be able to communicate across the entire fabric of devices. And so imagine an automobile, and actually at CES, there were a couple of auto manufacturers that just showed this kind of technology, where you get in the car, and it would immediately recognize who you are. Hi, Heather. Welcome back. Did you want me to put on that light jazz station that you enjoy? It already knows you. It already interacts with you, and you can be like, no, I've said I hate light jazz. Put on the hard rock. And it's like, okay, I'll remember hard rock next time, right? But the level of discourse that you might have with that car, if the car is disconnected, might be limited to what radio station, what temperature. But if I want to navigate, right? I mean, already in our cars, we know from Google Maps and Apple Maps and all the rest, it's actually kind of useful to know what the traffic situation is, isn't it? And so then I need communication from the car outward to other systems. Well, the same thing will be true for AI too. If I want to, so one of the use cases that we hear all the time for Pi is that people will turn it on in their car while they're driving as a companion, right? So I'll be driving, just as if I had somebody sitting with me in the car, I can talk to Pi and say, hey, help me think through this hard situation I have at work. And then you drive your 45-minute commute and you work it out with Pi, and by the time you get to work, you're like, oh my God, I have all these strategies for how to solve my work problem. But that isn't going to happen in the car. When you get to that sort of more complex reasoning and thought, it's going to have to happen in the cloud. So the AI will be embedded in edge systems and will be able to do certain kinds of tasks in a completely disconnected way, but we'll also have the ability to connect into larger and larger mesh networks of different capabilities as my needs change or expand.
How do you approach fine-tuning and orchestration to meet different enterprise needs, especially in regulated industries?
One of the things that we believe in is what we call private AI. And we think that companies should and ultimately will own and run their own AI, not to do everything, but to do the most regulated and private, secure kinds of activities, but also to do things that relate to their specific industry or even their specific company or even the particular workflow they're engaged in, where the system can have more intelligence about them and their environment and be really customized for that particular purpose. So if I simply say something like, the large language models are great at things like, give me a memo about how we might want to organize a party for employees. And what considerations should we take into account when we're planning this party? Well, a large language model can do that just fine. Now, if I wanted to say, I really want to plan a party that's relevant to my employees. Well, you have to know who my employees are, right? And so you're going to want to have a model that's customized to know something about the fact that you've got a particular kind of workforce that maybe a large number of your workforce is from a particular country or has a particular cultural background, so you want to be sensitive to that, right? The large model isn't going to have that context. And so you're going to want to be able to have your own local LLM that you're running yourself. So I think the first reason companies will do it is security, right? So there are going to be instances where you have information that you simply do not trust being outside your firewall. A second reason will be pragmatic. So did you know that every U.S. Navy ship has its own data center? Kind of crazy, right? But Navy ships have their own data center because there's an enormous amount of information that needs to be processed in real time on the ship because you can't rely on a network connection, right? So there can be pragmatic reasons why you're going to have to own and run your own AI. And then you're going to get to the customization. How do you actually make these models more fit for purpose to your industry, your company, to your particular process? And then there's cost because we're going to do so much compute, right? We're already seeing with our customers right now, the number of tokens, which is a sort of measure of consumption in AI, are doubling per employee every 3 months. Because as employees figure out how much they can do with this, how much more work, how much more productive they can be, how many more things they can do, they use it more and more, right? Well, the cost skyrockets. And so you need to be thinking about, for a given use, where is the most cost-effective way to run this that is still going to give me the results I need? And we think companies will run their own AI in part also then to manage that cost.
Now, when we talk about the future of AI, frankly, I could talk about an hour from now, but I want to look ahead about 3 to 5 years. How do you see AI reshaping internal operations, especially for companies outside of tech?
Yeah. So over the next 3 to 5 years, I think the number one challenge that we're all going to have to wrap our heads around is that I believe that we will arrive at a point where we can rely upon an AI the way we would rely upon a human employee. And so we're going to be able to have AI as a real coworker in the business. And we're going to want to have our real human workers do their work augmented by the AI. So we're going to have to change the way people and AI work together. We're going to have to rethink the way that we organize work so that we have AI doing the things that we don't want the humans doing. And that new way of organizing and managing work is, I think, going to be the hardest transformation over the next 3 to 5 years. But ultimately, I think we're going to arrive at a much better world. We're going to arrive at a world where so many of the things that are rote, repetitive, detail-oriented, and honestly, humans get bored and make mistakes doing, they're all going to be done by machine. And we're going to free people up to really be able to then push the envelope on the next set of hard problems that we want to be able to take on. I think there is, as you alluded to earlier, a challenge of being able to really wrap our heads, each of us individually, around this change that needs to happen. I think there are lots of people that go to work every day thinking, hey, I go to work and I move things from this box to this box. all day long, and it's boring and I hate it, but I get paid and I then can leave and do the things that are interesting to me, like play guitar or, go to coffee shops and talk with my friends or whatever it happens to be that pleases them. And I do think that one of the challenges of the new work environment is the work that is going to be available is work you're actually going to have to care about and think about. And so if I was going to describe it for humans, what the biggest change is, it is that if you're going to be gainfully employed in this new economy, it's going to be because you're doing a job that you actually invest yourself in. It's not going to be just moving things from one box to another.
Wow. What a fascinating thought. If we were to fast forward 5 years to 2030, what do you hope people will say Inflection AI made possible in the enterprise world?
So there's a set of things that I hope that we can help enterprises unlock. All three of these things are things that are, I think, going to be essential to companies succeeding in redefining themselves, transforming themselves with AI. The first is leadership. So many of our leaders today do not understand how AI is going to change the way the world works. And they need the hands-on experience. They need to have the visibility so that they can believe in it and thus then provide the support, air cover, the incentives, and the rewards to the rest of the organization for going through the transformation process. So I hope we can help unlock leaders' view of what AI is capable of. Number two is employees need to be able to have access in a safe and secure way to these tools. There isn't the risk of you're going to lose your job because you put the wrong information into the wrong model, right? And you also want employees to be able to say, wow, I just discovered an amazing thing that you can do with this tool, and I want to share it with the other employees and be rewarded for having discovered it and shared it, right? So I hope that we can enable employees and really be that unlock that gives them the confidence to use these tools in a safe and secure way, as well as the facilitation of the learning, the collective learning that can happen when we're all doing it together. And then the third thing is, I think every company needs to be doing experimentation. And the most valuable experimentation is the experimentation that from the outset is going to fail. And what I mean by that is take on a really hard problem in your organization, one that you're pretty sure that the tools today are not sufficient to be able to handle. But you take it on and design for the future because you want to understand what is it that needs to be true, what needs to be fixed about the way the technology works, so that use case can happen. And that way, now you've actually got an organization that is thinking about the future, not thinking about the past. So I hope we can unlock that too.
Amazing. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This was such a fascinating discussion and ultimately a really human discussion, which I think is so important to have when we're talking about this type of technology. So, Ted Shelton, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
And for everybody watching, this was another episode of Intel on AI. My name is Heather, and I am your host. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.
Visit intel.com/AI to learn more.